Even though St. Brendan the Navigator lived almost 1500 years ago, his legacy continues to this day. His fascinating life and inspirational achievements have attracted attention in every generation worldwide, down through the centuries. This is evident in the vast number of churches, schools, GA clubs, sailing clubs, and various other organisations and institutions in Ireland and abroad which have claimed Brendan as their patron saint. Even a hotel chain along the Atlantic coast of Canada and the USA calls itself after Brendan. And the fact that so many people proudly bear his name as Brendan or Brendan or Brandon, or in its feminine form as Brenda or Brendana or Brandolin, indicates the endurance of its inspirational life in the hearts and minds of people throughout the centuries. Indeed, Brendan has the unique distinction among the native Irish saints of being a patron of two Irish dioceses, Kerry and Clonfert. And he was also patron of the ancient see of Annadown, which was incorporated into the Archdiocese of Tuam in 1485. Even one of the Canary Islands was named in his honour, Santo Borondon, in 1405, by the Norman explorers who served King Henry III of Castile. That island is now submerged due to volcanic activity, but its memory is still celebrated in the Canaries and the Azores. Clearly, as this film documentary reveals from the archaeological, historical and cultural evidence, Brendan is not just an Irish saint, but is also very much a figure of major significance for the Atlantic world even today. I wish to thank most sincerely all who were involved in the making of this film documentary and all who supported it in any way. I hope that you, our audience, will find it most engaging, of your interest and enjoyment, as well as uplifting and inspirational.
Brendan descended from the ancient royal house of the Ciri Altrithe, and of all the Irish who have gained worldwide recognition, perhaps this 6th century saint is the most outstanding in terms of longevity of reputation. Unlike the others, Brendan and his achievements as an explorer in the North Atlantic Ocean have been widely known and celebrated since the 9th century, when a chronicler compiled various accounts of his life into one great book, the Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis, the Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot. It provides the earliest known descriptions of icebergs, volcanic eruptions, and even walruses, and it became one of the most widely transcribed and copied books of medieval Europe. Indeed, Brendan had been the only Irish person who was celebrated so popularly in Norman French, Flemish, Provençal, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese poetry, prose, and balladry during the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. Not long after Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1455, Brendan became the first Irishman to have his life achievements printed and published in German, the Sankt Brandon Legende in Augsburg, 1475. Indeed, Wynkin de Worde's prose version of Brendan's voyage was among the very first books printed and published in English by William Caxton in London in 1483. Such was his fame that Brendan is remembered across the breadth of Europe, from Bronte in Catania in Sicily, where a 13th century church is dedicated to him, to Töbe Kyrkebe near Stockholm in Sweden, where he is celebrated in the 15th century wall paintings by the most famous late medieval Scandinavian artist Albertus Pictor. The great explorers of early modern times such as Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal, Christopher Columbus, and Amerigo Vespucci, were very familiar with the story of Brendan. His experience inspired them. Brendan was, to use modern contemporary parlance, the Irish superstar or celebrity of medieval and Renaissance Europe.
Mount Brandon, located on the Dingle Peninsula overlooking the Western Ocean, forms part of the Slieve mountain range in County Kerry. This was originally the site where the Druids celebrated the Celtic festival of Lunasa, marking the beginning of the harvest season. Today it is named after the internationally known great Kerry saint Brendan the Navigator.
Brendan was born at Feenet, County Kerry, in 484 AD. He was one of a family of 5 children, 3 brothers and 1 sister. His father was Finlog of the Altrica, who were a sept of the Ciarí, and who claimed descent from Fergus Moore Macria, the military chief of the Red Branch Knights of Ulster. Brendan's mother's name was Cara of the Corcaguina of West Kerry.
Here in the fertile lands of North Kerry, between the Shannon estuary to the north and Tralee Bay to the south, Brendan's people, or Muintir Brendan, the ancient tribe of Ciarí held sway. During the 5th and 6th centuries, most of West Munster was under their influence. Their kings ruled the region from their high inland promontory fort, Tower Éireann on Cahir-Cunree. Later, during the 7th century, the Ciarí were taken control of by the Ciarí tribe, who had expanded their territorial powers westwards to central Munster.
Here at Barrow-Ardfert is located a well-preserved 3-ring fort, which is identified in Loughnagart, or the Book of Rights, as the royal seat, where the king of the sub-kingdom of Cashel would attend and preside over an assembly of his people, which was held on numerous occasions to transact both public and private business. Locals still refer to the entrance of the fort as the Royal Gate. This royal site is named as one of the possible birthplaces of St. Brendan. Concealed deep beneath many of our ancient ring forts are stone structures called souterrains. This souterrain was discovered when the capstone of one of the chambers was accidentally moved, and is a magnificent example of the craft of the dry stone builders dating from the 6th century. They were used as places of refuge in time of danger and for storing food. This date is reinforced by many examples where ohm stones dating to this period in time were used as roofing lintels or doorposts, which proves that ohm, the ancient Celtic alphabet written in stone, was becoming obsolete prior to this time due to the introduction of handwritten manuscripts.
Brendan was firstly to be given the name OV, but signs and portents attending his birth and baptism led him to being christened Bron Finn, meaning fair drop, when he was baptized here by Bishop Erk, who was the spiritual father of the Kerry saints. The well is located around 5 miles from Feenit and is believed to have been used by the first Christian converts of the area and many years later as a penal mass site during the penal days in Ireland. A stone panel stands adjacent to the well on which 3 figures are carved. Some historians relate that the 3 figures depicted here are those of Erk, Brendan and Ida. The panel, which dates from either the 13th or 14th century, either from the Kyrie-licensed Cistercian Abbey of Abidorney or from the Cathedral Church or the Abbey Church at Ardfert.
Here on this green and verdant hillside once stood the fortress of Caherard, and it was from this place, as a bright light lit up the sky over Feenit, that St. Bacchus MacDay, the chief prophet of Ireland, foretold the birth of Brendan thus: "There will be born this night between thee and the sea, you true and worthy king, who many kings and princes will revere."
Prior to this time, the Druids were the great dominant religious force of ancient Erin. However, all this was now about to change, and change dramatically, when a man called Patrick lit the first Paschal fire on the hill of Slane in defiance of the nearby pagan kings of Tara.
Here on the hill of Slane, 6 miles north of Tara, in the 5th century AD, Easter fire was used, not however as a weapon of industrial revolution, but rather as a weapon of spiritual revolution.
A fire which would rock the foundations of a kingdom and destroy a powerful Druid religion and its mysterious priests, crushing their gods into the dust. A spiritual fire that would burn across the centuries, a fire of faith and freedom which our forefathers defended to the death, a fire they allowed no man or no nation to extinguish. Originally brought to Ireland as a buy-slave by an Irish monarch named Niall of the 9 Hostages, a buy who would later escape and return years later to become the national apostle of Ireland. His name was Patrick.
And stooping down, St. Patrick plucked the shamrock from the sod, and holding up its triple leaves, he spoke to them of God. The first leaf is the Father, the second is the Son, the third leaf is the Holy Ghost, and yet the 3 are one.
The power of the powerful pagan priests was to diminish greatly with the coming of Christianity to Ireland. From the 5th to the 9th century, Christian monasteries began to play a major role in the society of the times and were centres of culture and learning, developing a remarkable and original fusion of abstract, Celtic and Christian representations in sculpture, decorated manuscripts, and metalwork. Many of these priceless artifacts, thankfully, still remain. Brendan was born into an area called Kerry, which is the ancient Irish name for Kerry. It was so named after a pre-Gaelic tribe who lived in part of the present county. It all began with the founding of the Kingdom of Keir in 75 AD, which was much smaller in area than today's county.
This tiny kingdom would grow and prosper across the centuries and would eventually become the Kingdom of Kerry. The Prince Keir was the son of Fergus Moore Macri, who was the military chief of the Red Branch Knights, and Maeve, the legendary warrior queen of Connacht. The boundaries of this ancient kingdom stretched from the mountains of Slieve Lucra to Tarbert and from the Traig of Lee, Tralee, to the mouth of the Shannon. It is written that Keir ruled this area for many years in great peace and great prosperity. The O'Connell Kerry are directly descended from the Prince Keir.
Brendan was 13th in line of descent from the Prince Keir.
Here at her convent at Killeedy, County Limerick, Saint Ida cared for the young Brendan for the first years of his life. All that remains today of this once imposing structure, a centre of great learning and piety in early Christian Ireland, are its ruins, surrounded by a graveyard. Ida was named as one of the 12 apostles of Ireland. She is also recognised as being the foster mother of the Irish saints. Adjacent to the convent is a holy well, along with 2 stone carved heads, which once formed part of the convent building. There are 2 possible burial sites mentioned for Saint Ida, here within the ruins of her convent at Killeedy, County Limerick, or at Witherswell, Tubridatfert, where Brendan was baptised. When Brendan was 5 years old, he was returned to the care of Bishop Erk at Atfert, who immersed him in sacred scripture for a further 5 years. He then placed Brendan under the care of Saint Jarlath of Tuam. Brendan was to remain with Saint Jarlath at his monastery at Tuam, County Galway, for a number of years, and it was from here that he travelled northwards to the plain of Moyena.
Moyena lies between the towns of Roscommon, Boyle, Strokestown and Castlebar in County Mayo. It once formed an enclave that was, according to the ancient Laurnagat, or Book of Rights, granted by King of Connacht to St. Coiling, a member of the Ciari Altra, and it was called Ciari Uchther, or Upper Kerry.
Here in the Catholic Church of St. John in Tralee, there is a stained glass window in the western transept relating to St. Brendan, which depicts some of the life and legends associated with him. In one of the window panels, we see him writing the rule for the order he would one day himself found during his travels across the great plain of Moyena. The inspiration came from a monastic rule written in Irish by Saint Ailbe, the patron saint of Munster, whose church at Emily in southwest Tipperary was for many years the province's chief ecclesiastical centre. This Celtic cross in the graveyard marks the final resting place of the saint. The present church is dedicated to Saint Ailbe. As Brendan grew to manhood, he travelled to various monasteries in different parts of Ireland, finally returning to Atfert at the beginning of the 6th century, where he was ordained by Bishop Erk at Termon Erk, Atfert, possibly the oldest church site in Kerry today. Shortly after this time, Erk died and was buried at Dunmorehead in Dunquin. An Ogham stone marks his final resting place. The stone stands in what was once the ancient cemetery site of the Cork Guine, sub-chiefs of the Clan Cunara of Cahar Conree. His feast day is celebrated on November the 2nd. Many historians claim that the Earc of Slane and Bishop Earc of Kerry were one and the same person, who was the chief druid to the High Kinglera when St. Patrick lit the Paschal fire on the hilltop at Slane.
As you travel northwards up the hill out of Ballyhaig, shortly after going round the left bend in the road, down to your right, you will notice a deep cleft in the cliffside. This is Glendahallen, the Glen of St. Dahallen, who is reputed to be the sister of Bishop Earc, the foster father of St. Brendan. People have visited this sacred place over the centuries to bathe their eyes in the waters of a holy well named Tobar na Súil, the Well of the Eyes. The feast day of the saint is celebrated in June of each year. On a hilltop to the west of the well stands the ruins of an ancient Christian relic which was the convent of St. Dahallen. This is a fine example of the architectural style termed early Christian. The ruins date to the 8th century, as the large sandstones used in its construction would likely have been put in place at that time.
It was at this time also that Brendan began to build cells for the young men who had gathered around him, attracted no doubt by his great learning and sanctity. And here on the summit of Mount Brandon, which is located in the barony of Corcaguina to the south of the Bay of Tralee, he built his oratory.
Brendan belonged to what is known as the Second Order of Irish Saints, also described as the 12 Apostles of Ireland. These apostles gave Irish Christianity its distinctive monastic character, which it was to retain for over 6 centuries. The monasteries were great powerhouses of learning and the arts as well as religion, and this was a great source for the revival of Europe after its period of darkness and barbarism during and after the collapse of the Roman Empire.
Irish monastic records tell us that during the reign of Pope Pelagius I, the second pope of the Byzantine papacy from 556 to 561 AD, that an Irish ecclesiastic named Brennan made 2 voyages across the Atlantic Ocean. In preparation for the first great sea voyage of discovery, Brendan fasted with his monks for 40 days, and then he chose 14 of them to accompany him. Brendan blessed the little Brandon Creek, located at the western side of the mountain, before he and his crew departed, steering for the summer solstice. The first journey may have lasted 5 years and taken them as far as Iceland, where there is presently a small archipelago named Irishman's Island. In his second great voyage, in an oak boat with a crew of 60, he and his monks sailed out across the Atlantic Ocean, recording many wonders.
As noted in the Navigatio Sancti Brendani, details of various natural phenomena that Brendan and his companions observed and recorded in their travels across the North Atlantic have been identified by modern scholars as key features in the region's physical geography. This provides additional evidence that they had undertaken the voyage. For example, what the Navigatio describes as the island of sheep beside the paradise of birds can be identified as the Faroe Islands. The description of the pillars of crystal in the clear sea capture the reality of a North Atlantic iceberg and the atmospheric conditions in which it can be best appreciated. the island of Smiths, noted for being very rocky, rough, and full of slag, with its fiery mountain and demonic smoke, suggests the volcanic landscape of Iceland. These physical descriptions and the sequence in which they were written in the Navigatio clearly delineate the course of Brendan's voyage from the Faroe Islands in the northeast to Iceland in the northwest of the Atlantic. Over 1,000 years later, Tim Severin, following the points indicated by scholars in the text of the Navigatio Sancti Brendani, proved that this book was no mere figment of the imagination in some medieval monk's mind.
After many years, the nameless land which he and his monks arrived at far to the west, which many eminent scholars later wrote that it was very possibly North America. Most certainly this achievement was the symbolic completion of an inner journey. When the great apostle Brendan died at Annadown on Sunday, May the 16th, in the year of our Lord 577, at the convent of his sister Breege, his faithful monks bore his body to Clonfert in great secrecy in the stillness of the night, and laid him to rest beneath its sacred soil within the confines of his Celtic monastic foundation there. This was done in fulfillment of his dying request.
The Norse explorer Leif Erikson is credited as being the first European to set foot in continental North America in 1001 AD. The Italian explorer Christopher Columbus is also credited as being the first explorer to reach the New World 500 years later in 1492.
The island of Iona lies 1 mile distant from the island of Mull off the west coast of Scotland. It is separated by an expanse of water named the Iona Sound. In 563, 12 monks made the journey across these turbulent waters and set up a monastery here whose fame would spread across the known world. Their leader was an Irishman of noble birth. He was both priest and prince. His name was Columkill.
In 1631, a calendar written for King Charles I, King of England and Scotland, named St. Brendan the Navigator, who was born at Feenit, County Kerry, Ireland, as the Apostle of the Orkneys and the Scottish Isles. Brendan had travelled to Scotland preaching the gospel and setting up settlements there 20 years prior to the arrival of St. Columkill. A cross once stood on the island of Iona, which was named St. Brendan's Cross.
Today, many place names in Scotland honour this Kerry saint. Here at the coastal city of Oban in western Scotland stands the impressive Oban Cathedral of St. Columba. The partially completed building was opened to the public on Christmas Eve 1934, with the tower being completed in 1953. In 1959, the 2 cathedral bells were blessed, with one being named Brendan in honour of the Irish-born Kerry saint. Today the cathedral stands like a sentinel looking out over the sea towards the sacred island of Iona. Like Columkill, Brendan is indeed a most significant Atlantic saint, who is honoured here on the west coast of Scotland and in Ireland at the Church of Ireland Cathedral at Clonfert and the Cathedral Church at Loughrea, both in County Galway. Here in his native Kerry, he is honoured in the cathedral in Killarney. St Mary's Cathedral, Killarney, whose patron saint is St Brendan, is the cathedral church of the bishops of Kerry. Our present bishop is Dr. Raymond Brown. The cathedral, which was constructed between 1842 to 1855, was designed by the renowned English architect Augustus Welby Pugin, and is considered to be one of the most important and best Gothic revival churches of the 19th century in Ireland. Here within the cathedral we have this magnificent pair of stained glass windows titled Dawn and Dusk. This is the creation of Irish-American sculptor Tadhg O'Donoghue Ross and his son Owen. Tadhg is also the creator of the monumental bronze sculpture of Brendan the Navigator, which today dominates Samphire Island, overlooking Fenit Harbour in County Kerry. A simple yet profound statement at the bottom of the window panels reads, "Why is there anything instead of nothing?" A dedication plaque on the windowsill informs us that the windows are dedicated by him and his family to his ancestors. The inclusion of this beautiful painting of the cathedral in this film presentation is by kind permission of the renowned artist Tina Reid.
With the coming of the millennium, I got an idea which I shared with Pat O'Mahony, and we decided we'd put in for planning permission for a statue of St. Brendan that we would put up on Samphire Island at the very peak, pointing out to the west, pointing out to the dream that Brendan had. Having got planning permission for the statue, a 12-foot high bronze on a 4-foot plinth, I went to Tadhg O'Donoghue of Denflesk, who is a well-known sculptor, and he produced the statue which is now in place.
The imposing figure of the sailor saint gazes out over the Atlantic Ocean as he points in the direction of his historic voyages of discovery across the Atlantic Ocean.
The next thing we did was we built a theme park under the statue, and there can be seen artifacts or replicas of artifacts from all over our history.
The late Father Garrod O'Donoghue, who spearheaded the Brendan Sculpture project from the outset, said on the day of the unveiling, "I hope the sculpture will remind locals and visitors alike that Kerry was home to one of the country's greatest prophets."
Father Garrod's sister now recalls her brother's dedication to St. Brendan.
He took Brendan for his confirmation name, and that was there, that Brendan was lurking in his mind. And then he really dedicated his senior years from the time he was across the Atlantic, when he was, in his 60s, till he discovered more about St. Brendan, and he really dedicated his life. He wrote a book, etc., about Brendan, and that's his relationship with our St. Brendan.
Taigo Dunhuras, who was born in 1942, is an internationally known Irish-American sculptor, painter and engraver. He is recognised as the hereditary chieftain of Loch Lane, Killarney, a Gaelic title from a remote antiquity.
I'd like to really go into the way that Garrod arranged this whole thing, because it was not easy, as you who are making a film now realize. Any project takes a while to get going, and in this project there was a bit of resistance. People did not want religious things, some people, and so they objected to it, and it was not allowed. I think it took 3 years. And over that time, Robert Pierce, the solicitor barrister, wouldn't let us quit. can be very convincing. And Garrod really was ready. We were both kind of tired of fighting each other. But we didn't quit, and finally, for some reason, they relented, and we got it, and not as big as we wanted to get it, but big enough. And so that was a great accomplishment in a way. And then that whole thing about Glunaglee, the knee facing battle, where if you look at the statue itself, it's a thing called a natural walking gait. In most sculpture, you'll find that the legs and the arms are opposite and moving in that way. This is just the opposite of that. And it looked a little awkward, but we decided we wanted it to have that energy of being different. And we were pleased with the way it came off. And Garrod was the one who talked about the knee being bent in the direction of battle, that the Irish kerns, the wood soldiers, were taught this thing, never retreat. And so that the knee would always be flexed toward the enemy and driving forward all the time. And that's what Brendan is doing, driving forward through the seas, the wild seas that are blowing his hair. And the day that we opened, there was a force 9 gale blowing, people were losing their hats. And very fitting and proper that it be that way. Elspeth, she was tasked with doing the medal. He has a medal on his chest to Our Lady and Child, but she's a very, very talented artist. This is the kind of woman I married, you see.
The badge, or whatever you would want to call it, was literally taken off of the model, so I worked on it separately. It would have been kind of awkward to do it outside, so I had it here in the kitchen on the table, and I was working away, fashioning the design on it, and it was kind of fun. I enjoyed myself. Well, the medal it's the Virgin Mary with the child. And I remember I had her hands up like this. From my perspective, it was, come to the Christ child. You're all welcome. Well, as I say, it was a family thing completely, insofar as all the rest of the lads, all our children were involved in it to a certain degree too. So it was a lot of fun for all of us.
Here at Clonfert, a small townland in East County Galway, stands the impressive 12th century Church of Ireland Cathedral. It stands on the site of an earlier 6th century church and monastery founded by St. Brendan. The magnificent doorway of the cathedral, which dates from the 12th century, is considered to be the most highly developed example of Romanesque architecture to be seen in Ireland today.
Here we are in the doorway of this 13th century abbey that became the Cathedral of Clonfert Diocese and then passed into the hands of the established church. And what you'll notice is the head motif, as we saw in Phoenix, in the statue of Tygo Donoghue. You find that the head motif is repeated here constantly. At every level you look at, you have the same head motif.
When doing this project, I'd love to involve the family. They're all artists in one form or another, and we worked on it as a family. So there were lots to do. There's lots of details, as you point out. And one of the ideas I had, and this is in the Islamic faith, actually, they have a thing, the 100 names of God. And there's an idea that God has 100 different names. I thought that was a rather romantic idea, so that if we put little faces of pagan gods around the hem of Britain, that, and this is the fantasy that you involve yourself in sometimes, that I did believe that if people got to know that if they could count every one of those heads, some people would look at each one, and if they counted up to it and they got 100, it would bring them good luck.
Well, we've looked at the heads, and we remember that the old Irish saw the personality in the head rather than in the heart. But there's more modern sculpture here then from about the last century. On my right here is St. Brendan, and on my left is his successor as Abbot of Clonfert, Mo Inu, another Kerryman, we believe. And they say that it is here he is buried, on this plaque under my knee here.
This is the 15th century ruin of the cathedral church dedicated to St. Brendan.
The most notable feature about the present building is that window here, which is evidently a magnificent example of the particular type of architecture.
Today, devotion at holy wells and sacred trees is still quite common throughout rural Ireland. In a woodland along the Nuns' Walk, near the medieval cathedral at Clonfert, County Galway, stands a horse chestnut ragtree, which is associated with St. Brendan. The tree, covered with votive offerings, has a small opening in its northern side, which is filled with water. The original well, once located in a nearby field, dried up after being interfered with. The well water, which is now contained within the side opening of this tree, is today known as St. Brendan's Well. The Reverend Dennis O'Donoghue, parish priest of Atfert, who died in 1991, published a book on the historical records, legends and traditions of St. Brendan.
This picture from an Irish stained glass window shows Brendan as a child playing with a boat, which has the insignia of the Clonfert bishopric on its sails. It was taken from the book St. Brendan the Navigator, commemorating the 1500th anniversary of Kerry's patron saint. The author of the publication, Breda Clifford, was the Commodore of the Tralee Sailing Club at Phoenix, County Kerry.
Ardfert, Phoenix, Mount Brandon, Clonfert and Anadown are foremost among the sacred spaces associated with St. Brendan, places which still draw pilgrims who venerate him. Yet there are other historic sites imbued with his spiritual imprint that are worthy of mention and of visiting, such as Tabervrenoin, or St. Brendan's Well on Valentia Island, noted for its curative properties for various ailments.
Remotely situated on a flat plain at Cooloo on the northwestern side of Valentia Island is St. Brendan's Well. It is known locally as Taberala Brennan, the Well of St. Brendan's Anointing. There is an altar built around the well. To the right is a stone inscribed with a cross. Over the years, the cross was scratched on the stone by the many pilgrims doing the rounds at the well. Located on the eastern side of the well are 3 ancient stone crosses dating from around the 7th to the 8th century. They may have been part of an early monastic settlement located there. All 3 crosses are similar in height and age.
Tradition also links Brendan with the historically significant site of Kilmalcather on the Dingle Peninsula, a place with a most remarkable fusion of ancient Christian and pagan artistic and architectural motifs of Irish and Viking origin in its magnificent Hiberno-Romanesque church and its remarkable collection of carved stone monuments.
Here there is both a Christian and a later medieval site, which encompasses a large area. Although the history of this site is associated with St. Brendan, it is thought to have been founded by Melcather, a local saint. Tradition relates, however, that St. Brendan once maintained a residence here. Located in the centre of this area is the 12th century Hiberno-Romanesque church ruins. It consists of a nave and a chancel, which is a later addition. The church was one of a number of stone-roofed buildings in Ireland. There are many interesting antiquities here at Kilmalcather, which include the alphabet stone, which is inscribed with a Latin alphabet dating to the 6th century. A hold inscribed Ogham stone, which may have originally been a standing stone, with the Ogham writing added later during the early Christian period. There is also a grave marker in the shape of a tau, which is the 19th letter of the Greek alphabet. A sundial which dates to the 8th century. The engraved temporal lines on this sundial were designed to mark the times when canonical prayers should be recited. A large unfinished ringless stone cross, 2 holy wells, along with St. Brendan's oratory and house. The first of the 2 holy wells, located at Kilmalcather, is situated in the field to the west of the main road. The well, which is now dry, is marked with a small cross-inscribed pillar. The second holy well is known as Tuberbrenon, St. Brendan's well. It is located next to St. Brendan's house with a series of stone steps leading down to it. The stone oratory of St. Brendan, Tamplin Brenon, at Kilmalcather, is the same style as the oratory at Gallerus, but is longer and slightly narrower. It is located 400 metres west of the church and north of the Saints' Road on the pilgrimage trail to Mount Brandon. Sadly, the roof is now missing from this precious Christian relic. St. Brendan's house stands to the north of the church and is a 2-storey medieval building which is also known as the priest's house. As you enter the town of Cahersiveen, there is a delightful monument to St. Brendan depicting 4 monks in a sickle-shaped boat with a cross, which is elevated in the air on 8 oars. The sculpture represents the monks' voyage to the monastery at Skellig Michael off the coast of Ireland. This is the work of Eamon O'Doherty, Irish sculptor, painter, printmaker, photographer and lecturer.
Following the dissolution of the penal laws and Catholic emancipation at the beginning of the 19th century, Roman Catholic communities in Ireland and Britain emerged to reclaim their local spiritual heritage by restoring ancient churches for worship, or building churches near or upon the sites of their ancient holy places. One such example is that of St. Brendan's Church at Craigston on the Isle of Barra in the Outer Hebrides. It was built in 1857 by Father William MacDonald near the site of an ancient monastic settlement at Borva Point that tradition maintains had been founded by St. Brendan. Known as the Mother Church of the Isle, St. Brendan's at Craigston expresses the tenacity of the faith over 1,000 years on Scotland's western shores. Here in Ireland, similar expressions of continuity of faith and traditional links with St. Brendan may be found at Curraheen on the northern shore of the Dingle Peninsula, where the present-day church dedicated to him and built during the 19th century on the reputed site of an ancient oratory associated with him, has some exquisite stained glass and sculptural depictions of him. In nearby Claughan, at the foot of Mount Brandon, the local Catholic community in the years after emancipation also built their church in honour of the saint and to express their continuity in faith with him. Yet within the same locality, the Anglican Church of Ireland community expressed their sense of connection with the local Christian heritage established by Brendan by dedicating their church at Killiney near Castle Gregory to him when they built it in 1812 near the site of a medieval ruined church and fortified tower with ancient crosses indeed as well. Thus, we can appreciate the inspirational significance of Brendan for both Catholic and Protestant Christians. One of the more striking examples of how Brendan continues to inspire commemoration of him in art and architecture, as well as spiritual identification with him among Christians, may be appreciated in the Church of Our Lady and St. Brendan in Tralee. Designed by local architect Mr. Dan Kennedy and built by the Fitzgerald brothers, who were building contractors during the late 1960s, early 1970s, this great ship-like structure, symbolic of the church as a ship of hope and constancy amid the seas of life and reality in all weathers, also evokes the navigation of St. Brendan as a symbolic journey through life. This theme is given further expression in a range of sculptures by Imogen Stewart and Brother Benedict Tutty, artworks by Sister Aloysius McVeigh and Vicky Crowley, and stained glass by Roisin Dowd Murphy and Des Devitt that commemorate the lives of Mary, the Mother of Christ, and of St. Brendan the Navigator. And by contemplation upon these works of art, the visitor to the church is invited to appreciate and understand the importance of Brendan, of Mary, of their lives, and the witnesses that they gave to Christ through the pursuit of their own abilities. And by these examples of sacred spaces associated with St. Brendan and richly decorated in artistic and architectural grandeur in a time span from the 6th to the 21st centuries, we can appreciate the impact this remarkable man has had on the imagination of humanity in soul, mind, and spirit.
Two major events, one in Wyoming County, West Virginia, USA in 1964, and at Brandon Creek, Dingle County, Kerry in 1976, were to launch St. Brendan onto the world stage once again.
In 1964, a petroglyph or rock carving was discovered in Wyoming County, West Virginia, USA. The 10-foot-long inscription was carved on a recessed portion of the cliff face underneath a natural rock overhang. This is the unfolding story and the ongoing controversy of that discovery, which, if correct, threatened to rewrite the history of North America. In 1970, an archaeologist from the West Virginia Economic and Geological Survey studied the Wyoming petroglyph and concluded that the rock carving was at least 500 to 700 years old, and that it was in marked contrast to other known petroglyphs in the area. However, many American traditional-minded archaeologists were adamant that the rock carvings were the work of early indigenous Americans. 12 years later, the archaeologist Dr. Robert Pyle, who had 27 years of field experience, took a serious interest in the petroglyph. He had a GS9 rating from the American federal government that recognized him as a professional archaeologist who had full authorization to work on federal projects. He had previously visited the parish of Tusist, nestling in the shadow of the Caha Mountains in the far south of County Kerry, Ireland. There he had examined a petroglyph on a cave wall carved in ogham, but in a form that differs from conventional ogham. Pyle thought, and stated sometime later, that it bore a striking resemblance to the Wyoming rock carving. Another person who visited the petroglyph site was Professor William Grant, an expert in linguistics from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. He confirmed the authenticity of the petroglyph as a form of ogham and dated it from 500 AD to 500 BC.
Edith Jean Gallagher, a native West Virginian who worked as a freelance historian in Connecticut, saw the photos in the West Virginia magazine. She visited the site and was convinced it was a major discovery, and she immediately contacted Professor Barry Fell, who was one of America's leading experts on ancient inscriptions, who on visiting the site recognized the writing as ogham, the ancient Celtic alphabet. When he deciphered the message, it read, "Array will gaze the notch on the left side at the time of sunrise on Christmas Day, the first season of the year, the season of the blessed advent of the Saviour Lord Christ. Behold, he is born of Mary, a woman." We read in the wonderful West Virginia magazine that Dr. Barry Fell pointed out that the team could verify his decipherment by observing the winter solstice sunrise from the Wyoming petroglyph. On December the 22nd, 1985, the group, which included Edith Jean Gallagher, Tony Shields and Bradley Toller, made their way to the petroglyph across a snow-covered ground. As the sun broke over the mountain, the first shaft of sunlight funneled through a notch in the cliff overhang, striking the center of the sun symbol. Amazed, I saw the beam expand as the sun rose, pushing the shadow from left to right, slowly bathing the entire message in sunlight. It was exactly what the translation said.
Is it possible that they had just received a message from across the ages? The presentation of evidence to support the theory that persons other than the Native Americans either visited or lived in North America prior to the arrival of Christopher Columbus is considered heresy in many academic circles.
More recently, a new discovery was made nearby the petroglyph site in West Virginia. In 1989, a human skeleton was discovered in a cave there. Its skull was subjected to expert examination, and the combined scientific data from its DNA and carbon-14 results established that the skeleton was of European origin and dated to the early 8th century. This is the earliest material evidence of a European presence in the North American continent that has been established through indisputable scientific data. Of further interest to this remarkable find was the earlier discovery of an ancient bone needle near the entrance of the cave. Significantly, the needle was etched with archaic Ogham characters. Though scientists had dated the bone to 2300 BC, the Ogham inscription dated to sometime between the 5th and 6th centuries of the Christian era.
Dr. William Grant of the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, and Dr. John Grant of the University of Maryland, USA, two linguistic experts, both endorsed the authenticity of the bone needle and the Wyoming petroglyph.
Yet scholars continue to dispute and argue over the case, and neither consensus nor definitive conclusion has been reached in the world of academia. Nevertheless, the combined discoveries of the Ogham petroglyph and its explicit Christian message, as well as a human skeleton of 8th century European origin and the Ogham engraved bone pin, make for a most compelling case for an Irish Christian presence in West Virginia in the early medieval period.
The National Geographic Society, Washington, D.C., one of the largest educational centers in the world, have acknowledged that Norsemen landed on the North American coast long before Columbus. They also point out, perhaps it was a group of shadowy yet very real seafaring monks who predated even the Vikings by more than 400 years. The Kiro monogram is found carved on all the Wyoming petroglyphs discovered to date. The Kiro represents the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, which were used by early Christians to represent Christ. It is still used in Christian iconography to this day. Surely the early indigenous Americans would have no knowledge of either the Greek alphabet or of those Christian symbols unless someone brought them from Europe. Was this a Christian message left by Christian monks after 600 AD in a language that was unknown to any culture but the Irish? Within the ruins of Kilshannig Church on the Dingle Peninsula, there is a fine example of a Kiro on a cross slab dating from the 7th century.
In 1985, an eminent Celtic scholar from the Catholic University of America visited the site in the person of Professor Robert T. Meyer. He stated that nobody could have faked this, and the petroglyph probably dated from the 6th to the 8th century. He went on to say that for Celtic scholars, it is probably as important as the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In October of 1988, representatives from the Irish Embassy in Washington, D.C., which included Richard A. O'Brien, the Embassy Secretary, and Cultural Affairs Attaché Kevin Dowling, met with archaeologist Robert Pyle on site to examine the ancient rock carvings, which Pyle described as a unique discovery.
Since this discovery, a number of other rock carvings, similar to the ones in West Virginia, all bearing Christian symbols, including the Dextra Dei, the right hand of God, have been found along an ancient trail that traversed the Appalachian mountaintops down to the Ohio River, which was another ancient trail.
The late eminent archaeologist Dr. David Kelly of the University of Alberta, Calgary in Canada was one of the greatest critics of Dr. Barry Fell. And Kelly wrote in his Review of Archaeology essay the following with reference to Fell. Quote, "I have no personal doubt that some of the inscriptions which have been reported are genuine Celtic Ogham. These are the very markings that Orthodox scholars dismissed as plough marks or forgeries or the figment of the New Age imaginations. Despite my occasional harsh criticism of Fell's treatment of individual inscriptions, it should be recognized that without Fell's works, there would have been no North American Ogham problems to perplex us. We need to ask not only where Fell had done wrong in his epigraphy, but where we have gone wrong as archaeologists in not recognizing such an extensive European presence in the New World. The American researchologist Gary Vay, writing in an article in the American View Zone magazine in 2019, summed it all up in the following sentences concerning the American disputed Ogham and other petroglyph carvings. Quote, "It would indeed be a great pity if these ancient petroglyphs were not protected in some manner, but are simply left to be worn and tarnished by the elements, once more free to hide the untidy bits of history that might just reveal something about ourselves that we don't know right now."
One cannot help but wonder if after 14 centuries has the spirit of this remarkable Kerryman, Brendan the Navigator, returned to gently ruffle the pages of the North American history books.
And Brendan's story became, in the Middle Ages, the tale that that focused the whole European from Portugal to Spain to go west, because they believed Brendan had an island out there and it did exist. And his book, as Garrod has pointed out to me, his book was one of the most popular books of the Middle Ages, the waning of the Middle Ages, let's say, when, of course, America was discovered. So, yeah, Brendan is a very, very important character, every which way you look at him. And he does represent a lot of those men who probably were going over, as the evidence that you've found things in Wyoming. Can you imagine? They traveled that far. Yeah. So, we Irish, very small nation. I remember Bill Cullen telling me there was a book, How the Irish Saved Civilization, and I couldn't help but, laugh a little bit, because it sounds kind of pompous, but it's true. We did that for that brief period when we were the light of learning, when the rest of the lights of learning had gone out.
In the course of this documentary on St. Brendan the Navigator and his achievements, it is important for us to remember his education, his ministry, his foundation of churches and monasteries, and his voyages took place during a period of European history that is known as the Dark Ages, between the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century and the great revival of Western Europe under the first Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne in the 9th century. During this period of history, the remnants of Greco-Roman civilization and culture, science and literature, philosophy and law were preserved and promoted in Ireland's monastic academies and schools. Places such as Clonmacnoise, Bangor, Lismore, Brendan's Clonfert, and Kerry's own monastic isle of Inishfallen were renowned throughout Europe as beacons of civilization. Emperor Charlemagne recruited such Irish scholarly monks and nuns in his program for reviving civility and education throughout his empire, from the west coast of France to the River Oder and from the North Sea to the Mediterranean. Today, international scholarly authorities, as well as political and religious leaders, acknowledge the remarkable role played by Irish missionary monks and nuns such as St. Columbanus, St. Dymphna, and St. Kilian in reviving civilization, culture, and Christianity in Europe from their monastic academies in places such as Bobbio, Liège, Luxeuil, Cologne, Salzburg, and Vienna. 400 years after the fall of Rome, no place in Europe, with the exception of the Irish monasteries, were practicing the art of illustrated scripture. Their status as universalia, or universities, drew scholars and students from all over Ireland, which was then relatively stable in comparison with the rest of Western Europe, which was then ravaged by almost constant warfare among the various barbarian tribes who had overrun the collapsed Roman Empire, and by the conquests of the Moors and Saracens in what is now Spain, Portugal, southern France, and Sicily. It was these Irish saints and scholars who were the last literate northern Europeans, who travelled throughout Europe teaching and educating the clergy, and like the phoenix rising from the ashes, they played a major role in saving civilization as we know it today. Such was Ireland's reputation at the time that it was given the title Insula Sanctorum et Doctorum, the island of saints and scholars. This title is therefore rooted in the very early science of our national ancestry. We know from the personal accounts of the early modern explorers and cartographers that they were familiar with the story of St. Brendan's voyage across the North Atlantic. Even the maps and partolan charts and geographical charts that they had used illustrated the Isle of St. Brendan near the Canary Islands. It has since been submerged due to an earthquake in the 18th century, but it is still remembered in Canarian folk tradition. Interestingly, while the 16th and 17th century Venetian, Portuguese, Spanish, German, and French sources acknowledge the significance of St. Brendan's voyage and its place in the canon of maritime navigational literature, it is curiously either ignored or passed over as something of little consequence in similar sources of English provenance. This may be explained by the policies pursued by England's successive Tudor, Stuart, and Cromwellian regimes in challenging Spanish and other European powers' territorial claims in the Americas, as much as it might have to do with the successive regimes' justification for their policies of subjugation, dispossession, plantation, and Anglicization of Ireland. All of these interesting points of information, as well as the archaeological and historical evidence and the testimonies of mariners' experiences that we have seen in this documentary, indicate the significance of St. Brendan in the history of exploration and navigation. Before the historically famous transatlantic voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492, the Genoese sailor, while on a Portuguese merchant ship, had visited Galway on Ireland's west coast in 1477. He noted this in the margin of his copy of Pierre Dailly's Imago Mundi. While much attention is focused on Columbus having prayed in Galway's St. Nicholas Collegiate Church, a lesser-known detail throws interesting light on the matter of medieval transatlantic migration. In the same year that Columbus visited Galway, the book Historia Rerum Ubique Gestarum by Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini was published in Venice in 1477. By then the author was dead, but he had been more commonly known as Pope Pius II, who reigned from 1458 to 1464. In his book, Piccolomini discussed the arrival of unknown peoples who had been swept ashore by storms on Europe's Atlantic coast. Columbus had acquired a copy of this book for his own library, for in 1481 he wrote the following note in Latin on the margin opposite the passage where Piccolomini recounts these transatlantic arrivals. Quote, "Men from Cathay, China, came towards the west. We saw many remarkable things, and particularly in Galway, in Ireland, a man and a woman on two pieces of wood of the most extraordinary appearance," unquote. We know that the Gulf Stream carries fish, mammals, plants and driftwood from the American continent to the shores of southwestern Ireland. Why couldn't the Gulf Stream wash up an indigenous Amerindian vessel, 2 dugout canoes that had been tied together perhaps? This accidental encounter with the indigenous peoples of North America, or Chinese as Columbus had believed, was to prove an important moment in his life. After he died, his son recalled this event in Galway in his father's biography. Amid the excitement surrounding the scene he witnessed in Galway, might Columbus have heard mention of St. Brendan's voyage? After all, the Navigatio Sancti Brendani was a well-known early printed book that was in wide circulation in Europe at this time. Another interesting piece of this jigsaw emerges from the time when Columbus had been living in Portugal, where he researched records and books relating to the sea voyages sponsored by the Order of Christ, whose Grand Master had been Prince Henry the Navigator, who lived from 1394 to 1460. The order was founded in 1319 to accommodate the Portuguese branch of the Order of the Knights Templar, which had been abolished in 1312. Its headquarters and great library were at Tomar, and therein was a copy of the Navigatio Sancti Brendani, and it is most likely that Columbus had read it.
Craiganoan, County Clare, is Ireland's original award-winning prehistoric park. Here you can explore the roots of the people, their homesteads, animals and artefacts of our Celtic ancestors of over 1,000 years ago, and experience the resilience and fortitude of these early Bronze Age settlers. One of the most prized exhibits on display here today is the Brendan boat, which is the actual boat in which Tim Severn travelled over 2,000 miles from Brandon Creek, Dingle County, Kerry to Newfoundland, an island off the Canadian coast.
In the 1970s, the British explorer Tim Severn proved that Irish monks could indeed have sailed in their leather boats to North America, which he and his crew succeeded in doing in an authentic replica of such sailing craft. This proved beyond doubt that St. Brendan's voyage was no mere medieval fantasy, but a highly plausible tale founded on real events and real people.
On arrival, he told the waiting reporters, "It was only 150 years after Columbus that the people began to doubt that the Irish had been here. We've restored the balance."
The reenactment of Brendan's famous voyage in 1976-77 by the internationally renowned and highly distinguished explorer, maritime historian and writer Tim Severn certainly revived interest worldwide in Brendan's remarkable achievement. It inspired the sublime music of composer Sean Davies' first orchestral suite, The Brendan Voyage, in 1980, and subsequent artistic, literary and cultural endeavours, not only in Ireland but worldwide.
Tim Severn took a particular interest and made many valuable suggestions in the making of this film documentary. It was his intention to give an interview for inclusion in it. He met with its producer Eamon O'Reilly and 2 of the production team members, Sean Quinlan and Danny Houlihan, to discuss arrangements for same on Thursday the 30th and on Friday the 31st of March 2017. This was on the occasion of his visit to the Shanachie Kerry Writers Museum in conjunction with the Listowel and District Historical Society, where he was delivering a lecture on the Brendan voyage on the Thursday night. Unfortunately, due to various circumstances and the subsequent public health protocols, and the travel restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the interview was prevented from being filmed. Nevertheless, the film production team kept in constant touch with Tim Severin by telephone on a weekly basis during 2020. Towards the end of the year, Tim's illness overtook him, and to the shock and great sadness of everyone who knew him, Tim died at his home in Timoleague, West Cork, on the 18th of December 2020. The 1,200-year-old Navigatio Sancti Brendani was Tim's guidebook across the North Atlantic Ocean almost 45 years ago. With his death on that December day, we have lost one of our greatest national treasures. May St. Brendan now guide his gentle soul through the waters and the realms of paradise.
Teamwork and cohesion are essential for the survival of any group at the mercy of the elements or in competition for a prize. And as we have seen in the experiences of Tim Severin and his crewmen, or in our reading of the experiences of Brendan and his companions in the text of the Navigatio Sancti Brendani itself, in both instances, neither crew had the benefit of modern motorized technology, and therefore everything depended on their own group effort. Here, a contemporary contemplative insight into the psychology and spirituality of such teamwork is provided by Sister Colette O'Reilly of the Poor Clare community in Cork.
St. Brendan had to cope with a lot of challenges, and one of the aspects of his life that's important, I suppose, particularly for me as a religious and for all religious, is that aspect of community. He travelled with a group of monks, and obviously they had to work together, pull together literally in the rowing, and that was a very important part of their life on the sea. We can all find ourselves at sea, as St. Brendan was, and it's important for us to know that we can trust that God is with us.
A more recent demonstration of the necessity for teamwork for survival against the elements while crossing the Atlantic without any functioning modern navigational technology, and just trusting in the signs of nature, basic common sense, and the mercy of God, may be appreciated in the adventure of Father Gearóid O'Donoghue, Bill Verity, and Robert Pearce. Their experience offers us further insights into what it was like for St. Brendan and his monks on their voyage over 1,000 years ago.
My interest in Brendan was sparked as I crossed the Atlantic in the year 1980. The skipper on board the boat, the small yacht that we crossed in, was Bill Verity. And Bill Verity had done a lot of research on Brendan. In fact, he built on the pier in Phoenix a boat which he called the Brendan, a 20-foot model of the boat that Brendan would have used in his travels. I have experiences of storms at sea like Brendan had. Just one that comes to mind is that a hurricane caught up with us in the middle of the Atlantic. Now, when you're in that kind of a hurricane, you realize that there's somebody looking after you. Put the two together, my own interest in the fact that Brendan belonged to Phoenix and Phoenix belonged to Brendan, and the fact that I knew the ocean and I knew what Brendan must have felt at times.
Robert Pearce of Listowel was one of the crew members on board that epic 28-day voyage across the Atlantic from the east coast of America to Phoenix Harbour, County Kerry, Ireland.
That everything was going grand, and we came up near the Newfoundland bank, and the first thing we hit was fog, and then the next thing was we got caught in the tail end of a hurricane, and boy was that something. The mast in our boat was 40 feet high, and the waves were higher, and they were coming down on top of us. So Bill got every single bit of rope and any loose furniture he could, and he threw the ropes and the furniture tied onto it over the stern of the boat, so that when we were coming down the side of a wave, they were at the other side and they kept us from flipping over. The boat was being thumped as if people were with hammers at both sides of it. Then after a couple of days, we got through the storm and we got becalmed. I should say a funny thing that happened throughout the storm, difficult and all as it was, Bill Verity, who was a professed atheist, insisted on Father Garrod saying the Mass every day, because he said to me, Garrod said to me, since he was ordained, he never missed saying Mass for a single day. At this stage, our equipment, our electricity was all gone, our engine had been damaged and flooded. The only thing we had was the compass. That was the only thing we had to go. All our radios and everything were gone. Bill came up and he said, we're about 100 miles north of the Azores. And I said to him, how do you know that? He said, look at the way the sea, even though it's calm, is heaving. That means the mountain range of the Azores are underneath us. And above that then, look at that bird out there. He said, that bird has a range of about 120 miles from the Azores. And that bird has a range of about 200, 250 miles from Iceland and places like that.
After several more eventful days at sea, Robert saw a light in the distance which was not moving.
So it was getting dawn at that stage. So I got Bill up. And what we did is we pulled him up on the mast on his little chair. And he studied the thing. And the next thing he shouted, we're dead on the Tíreacht, the lighthouse off of the Smeric Harbour, the island there, the Tíreacht and the Blaskets. The fishing boats were going up and down inside us out of Smeric Harbour and out of the Blaskets and things like that. So we got a mirror and we started flashing it at a boat passing up and down. And he comes on and said, what the hell were we up to, sort of thing. So we thought we'd come in from America. We had no engine, no lights, no radio, no anything. So they towed us into Smeric. And the Browns then came over from Phoenix, and we had a great night. They were towed back into Phoenix. So that was the story.
Today, the many sacred ruined buildings which pattern the landscape of County Kerry rekindle memories of lofty cathedrals and monasteries, of silent convents, ancient holy wells, and of stone chapels on the hilltop. Here, the Te Deum of Patrick, Erk, Ida, and a legion of holy men and women once rose in sweet refrain to the canopy of the heavens. These venerable ruins continue to tell the ongoing story of a country's greatness, of its laughter and its tears. For here the briar is now entwined with the rose, and desolate though these sacred places may now be, they continue to remind us of our descent and lineage in an age when man's conscience was his crown.
Today, the once powerful warlords who ravaged the country and laid their blood-stained swords on the high altars of cathedrals and churches in an act of defiance and disrespect now lie forgotten in ivy and briar-covered tombs, and all their so-called victories are today nothing more than ashes in the wind.
As the statue of Brendan points out northwest to the Atlantic, it reminds us of the many journeys that Brendan made by sea, particularly the one where he is reputed to have reached America. But it opens a dream that people have when they look at the Atlantic. I don't regret a moment that I have spent in the cause of St. Brendan. He's an absolutely wonderful person who found happiness. I believe I have found the same kind of happiness.
Overall, one of the most satisfying things I've ever been involved with was the Brendan statue.
The life of this saint should be an explosion of light in an era of great darkness on the Emerald Isle that shows us the way to true happiness. May God bless us through the intercession of St. Brendan and, of course, through the intercession of Our Lady of Clonfert.
We trust that this audio-visual documentary has provided you with a greater understanding of this most remarkable Irishman, St. Brendan, and the historical, geographical, social and cultural context in which he lived. The formative influences that shaped his youth and upbringing here in North Munster, and that drove him forward to explore the Atlantic and spread Christian civilization.
To the sailor saint, Brendan the Navigator, a royal son of Ireland, of the Red Branch Knights of Ulster, of Feenet, Ardfert and Clonfert, of the Royal House of the Golden Line of Keir, and of the kings of the Kingdom of Kerry.